Welcome to Is It Enough? My name is Rebecca Spooner. I'm a homeschool mom of 5 young kids who was homeschooled myself, so homeschooling is kind of my life. I've grown up in it, I've experienced it all my life, and then I got married and had kids, and I just always knew I wanted to homeschool my kids. I think I was homeschooling them from when they were infants. I did little learning things, and we did sign language, and I was so gung-ho for homeschooling from day one, so it's a big part of who I am. I have always lived and breathed homeschooling, and I'm pretty passionate about it. I am the author of More Than Words Bible Curriculum, as well as the creator of Gather Round Homeschool. And I'm really excited about this session because it's probably the question that I get the most on my blog, in social media. The question that most people tend to ask me is, how do I know I'm doing enough? And so I think that this is an important question. It's obviously a relevant question, and it's one that we should just talk about and just be honest. So we're gonna have a conversation today. You may want coffee. I think it's one of those conversations where coffee is just necessary, and let's get started. All right, so is it enough? Pre-warning, disclaimer, I don't know, whatever you call that. I'm pretty passionate about this, so it may be a little fast at times, but I'm gonna try to slow it down. I'm gonna try to, be coherent and chill about it and just really relaxed. But I don't like this question because I feel like this sense of injustice towards it, that it is a lie from the enemy trying to steal our joy and our peace and to make us constantly compare ourselves with one another. And I don't like the enemy. And so I just get a little irritated with this question. Is it enough? How do I know that it is enough? Ultimately, you guys, who decides? Who decides if something is enough or not? Obviously not you and I, because we're going to everyone else asking that question. How do I know it's enough? I don't even know when I know it's enough because someone else is deciding that for me. Someone else clearly out there has some sort of a measuring stick that is measuring education and whether or not it is enough for my child. I need to find that measuring stick so I can measure myself next to it and decide if we're lining up or if we're failing. And so we're seeking everyone else to try to find this question and the answer for us. How do I know it's enough? Here is what our education philosophy has done. Our education philosophy has taken a line. They've taken every child in the world that goes to school and they have done testing. So they implement this state testing, provincial testing, federal testing to figure out where generally kids in grade 4, in grade 5, in grade 6 are at. Then based on this line, they say, here's the kids that were way above it. Here's the kids that were way below in that grade level. So in the middle is normal. But actually no one was in the middle. Really, most people were either up here or they were down here, but they drew the line in the middle, deciding that that was normal based on that. So actually, we're measuring ourselves out of something that's totally false to begin with. There is no line. Kids aren't on that line. They're either up here or they're down here, and they just drew a line in the middle to call it an average. I'm not looking for average kids. And honestly, education is not necessarily the ruler I'm using to decide whether my kids are average, whether they excel, whether they go above and beyond, or whether they need improvement. That's not what I'm deciding that on, is their education or how much information they can spit out to me. So to me, it's a measuring stick that I don't even want to use to begin with, but the whole idea of education and deciding when we know it's enough, that whole measuring stick is actually a total sham to begin with. So someone out there has decided that this is what we have to measure our children up to. And so we have our state requirements, we have our provincial requirements. Everyone has different requirements of what we're supposed to teach our kids, what are the proposed learning outcomes that they're supposed to cover and that they're supposed to master at this grade level. Again, according to who, and what does any of that even mean? Because there is no normal line. Your kids are all developing at a different rate. Your kids are all different. Your kids all have their different interests, their own strengths and weaknesses. Every kid out there does. So it's not even fair to decide that there is some sort of normal that they're supposed to rise up to or be at, or decide whether or not they're above normal or exceeding that, so we can feel really good about ourselves. I know that this is a touchy thing, but this is an important thing. This is a super important thing. Who is deciding that for you? Right now, actually, take a pen and paper and write down the answer to that. Who is deciding what normal is? Who is deciding for you what is enough? Are you basing that off of how much education? Are you basing that off of how much information you can stuff in their brain? Are you basing that off their grades? Are you basing that off of school or learning outcomes or what other people are telling you they're supposed to learn in kindergarten or grade 1 or grade 2? Who is deciding that for you? Because when you understand who is deciding it, you can start to look at that and say, is that even worthy of me having to measure up to? If you're doing it for the sake of school outcomes, then I can tell you for a fact, like I said, that's not even real. That's not even real. So that's the first thing, is our measuring stick is actually a sham. But let's move on from that. Okay, our measuring stick is a sham. Let's say, for active argument, that you guys believe me on that, and we'll move on to step 2, which is not necessarily that, but is what are we actually hoping to achieve from this whole thing? From homeschooling, by asking that question, if it is enough, we're actually hoping that our kids are actually receiving a level of education. So let's talk about that. Do you think that by stuffing information in your child's brain, you can decide what they're learning? Wait. Someone out there is like, wait, go back, hit replay, do that again. Because that's actually, again, totally such a false measuring stick. That's not something we can measure on. The amount of information that we teach our kids actually tells us nothing about what they're retaining. Okay, so the answer is, clearly, let's test our children. If we test our children, then we're going to know what they actually are retaining, and therefore, that's the measuring stick we're going to use on what they're learning and how smart they are. I'm going to guess my answer to that is also that is totally false, because here's what your kids are going to do. Have you ever seen the movie Inside Out? It's brilliant. Brilliant movie. So there's long-term memory and then there's short-term memory. So when it comes to testing, and you probably can attest to this yourself because you probably went to school and experienced testing and know this, you study like crazy for the sake of a test. It's all logged in short-term memory because you're just learning rote facts that mean nothing to you. Then you have the test, and then within a month, 2 months later, you completely forget all that information because you didn't need it. It didn't mean anything to you. Your brain needs to build pathways. In order for pathways to be easily accessible, you need to access that information over and over and over and over again. It builds a strong pathway so that when someone asks you something, you know that answer because you've experienced it, you've heard it, you've seen it, you've written it, you've experienced it. It means something to you. Through all these different ways, you built different pathways. So when someone asks you, you've truly mastered that information because you truly owned it. We can't force that on our kids. We can give them education, we can teach them, we can give them information, but they are the ones ultimately that decide if they're going to be educated. This is so important. It's so important. Your kids play a huge role in how much is enough because they're the ones actually ultimately deciding that. If they're crying and melting down on the floor, it's enough. Because it doesn't matter how much information you continue to try to stuff in their brain, they're actually not in a place of receiving anything right now, so you're actually wasting your time. You know how sometimes you're reading to your kids and they're all goofing off and you feel like you're wasting your time? I'm going to be the one that's going to break the bubble right now and tell you the truth. You are. You are wasting your time. If nobody is receiving, if you've got kid A over here just crying about the amount of information, go ahead, stop what you're doing and ask them what you just said. They don't know. Because they're not invested in it, they're not interested in it, it means nothing to them, they've shut off. Now, it doesn't mean that you can never do school with them. Let's say you have a child that's always like that. Okay, well, we can talk about that. But there are sometimes strategies and different things that you need to do for those kids. But I'm telling you that if you're having a moment where your kid is overwhelmed, where they've hit a wall, where they're frustrated, where they're just goofing off, they're obviously not engaged in the lesson, and they aren't retaining anything. So when it comes to, is it enough? First of all, we're measuring that from a place that doesn't even mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. Secondly, we're basing that off of how much information our kids can recite back to us, which in both aspects of that is not actually super helpful either. Because if we're basing it off of testing, then unless they've really mastered that and it meant something to them, it's just short-term memory and they're not going to retain it anyways. Ask yourself this question. How much do you remember from your high school education? Wait, go back further. How about from like elementary school. Okay, here's one. Ancient Greece. For where I live, ancient Greece is supposed to be covered, I don't even know. I don't look at outcomes. Obviously, I'm pretty passionate about this. But ancient Greece, I'm pretty sure it's somewhere around grade 5. They're supposed to learn ancient Greece. Not in grade 10. No, not in grade 12. See, the time for them to learn ancient Greece is grade 5. That's when they're supposed to learn it. So you're going to teach your kids about ancient Greece once, and then you're never going to talk about it again. Do you know what I remember from ancient Greece? I was homeschooled. I'll tell you what I remember. I remember that we made like some sort of like diorama something or other. I remember building things. I remember like some get-togethers and eating some different foods. That's what I remember about ancient Greece. Dates? No. Names? Maybe, slightly, not to tell you off the top of my head. You guys, you don't remember this stuff. So what's the point of us stressing about they have to learn about ancient Greece in grade 5 when that's like, why? Why? Here's sometimes the why. A real thing is in some states, in some province, in some situations, you do have to teach your kids certain things legally. You are legally required to do a certain number of hours. You are legally required to teach them certain things. You are legally required to give proof. Now, unless you want to have your kids taken away from you, it's important that we follow and obey those things. So yes, you may have extenuating circumstances that are dictating that, but I can tell you that 90% of us don't. 90% of people in the United States and Canada have very little restrictions on exactly what they have to teach their kids. So we kill ourselves with these expectations and this pressure and this question and these doubts constantly circulating in our heads of what are we teaching our kids? Is it enough? Are we failing? Well, actually, it doesn't all rely on you anyway. So that's so important for us to recognize. It doesn't. Our kids play a huge role in what we're learning. So if we switch that perspective to my child actually decides what they're going to learn, what's interesting to them, then I know that my daughter, who dies when we talk about anything that is too logical and is really just interested in cats and horses, that if it's not about that stuff that she's interested in, then she's generally not actually retaining a whole lot. I know if I go and I find something on horses and I give her a magazine on cats and how to care for them, she's going to tell me all the information about that because she's fascinated by it, because she has a cat, because she's passionate about it. So I know that I can actually take things my kids are interested in. I can bring in other subjects into that in units or different approaches or get them to write about that. I can get her, she's super, we go out for a coffee and she decides she wants to be a barista. Great, I want you to make me a list and take my order. Now she's writing. Now she's reading different things. So there's so many different ways that you can approach and tackle things in a way that actually means something to them, because if we shift our perspective to the fact that our kids have to own their education, then maybe instead of us trying so hard in deciding what is enough or what information they need to learn, we can begin to seek what they're interested in and help them make those connections in a way that means something to them, so that it's actually retained, so that they actually remember it. Because if they don't remember it, then what are we doing? What are we doing? So it's important. Now, there are ways that you can do that. So let's say you have a child, you have a topic you're learning about, and you're learning about it as a family. Some of your kids are into it, some of your kids aren't into it. So what do you do in a situation like that? You can't custom tailor education when you have a large family to every kid's specific needs, desires, interests, and strengths. It's not going to happen. So instead, you focus on this one area and you tweak it for your kids' different needs, for their different strengths or weaknesses, in order to adapt it for what they're actually looking for. You expand it and you try to tie in their interests as much as you possibly can. And you help them grow in their character or maybe weak work ethic so that they're continually hitting these things over and over again. And yeah, sometimes you're not going to always love it, but that's okay. We're going to work on it together. And you help them grow in those areas. It's one of these things that you can tackle too in different angles. So you can say, all right, I know you're not super passionate about this, but maybe if we read about it and then we watch a video about it and then we find this fun app and you like play with space and you get to make your own model. And then maybe if we build a model of space, and then maybe if we now maybe even though this wasn't your strength, your interest, your passion, because we've built so many connections in your brain, we've tackled it from all these different angles, it actually means something to you now. Now you actually remember it because there was an experience around that. And it doesn't always have to be an experience of I love it and I'm passionate about it. It's an experience they're going to remember. Maybe it's an experience because you built family memories and you've had fun together. And because you as a family were having fun, it's tethered to this family memory of connection, this warm, fuzzy feeling that they get. Like when I look back and dressing up in medieval costumes and building our own things and having our own feasts together with other homeschool families, it's tethered forever in my memory, not because I was interested in medieval times, but because I was tethered to family relationship and connection and memories. And so I have this warm, nostalgic feeling when I look back at that in my life, and it's something that I remember. Not necessarily the facts, but I remember the experiences. So we can use experiences to tie it together for our kids. When we're asking ourselves this question, is it enough? You need to figure out who is answering that for you. Where are you going to find that information? What is answering that for you? The amount of information. What are you looking for? What's your measuring stick for that? And then shift away from all of that. Focus on what you are doing. Focus on what your kids are, what they're interested in, what they're good at, and then walk in the direction that you're supposed to walk. Because that's ultimately it. No one else actually can answer that question for you. You answer that question for you. I'm not going to go and ask somebody who's at home with their one child, is it enough when I have 5 kids and I'm working, when they have 8 hours a day that they're building amazing things and going on field trips and doing all this stuff because they have the time. And I am bouncing from child to child to child to child and working nearly full time. I obviously don't have the time. So I'm doing differently than them. I'm doing less than them. And yet I can't look to that person and decide I'm not doing enough because I see what they're doing. So stop comparing yourself. Focus on what you're supposed to be doing. Focus on what you need to be doing. And focus on relationship and fun and the experience of learning, because if that is your focus, your kids are going to retain it. They are going to remember it. Everyone's going to have so much more fun because it's not arbitrary numbers or lines or information that you're going to, and they're actually going to learn it in the process. So anyways, those are my thoughts on is it enough? If you have other questions about this, I would love for you to comment below, or you can send me an email and we can have further discussion about this very topic because it is a big one and it is an important one. I do encourage you to shift your perspective and to spend a few minutes sitting down and deciding where that's stemming from, because it's different for everybody, whether that's stemming from other people or from comparison or from your own experience in school that you're basing it off of, and then figuring out what you can actually do moving forward. What is actually enough for you? What are you passionate about? What are you interested in? What's important in your state? What are your requirements? What does your spouse say? Do they feel like it needs to be more or less? And do research and figure out what that answer and what you actually believe that answer to be, so that you're not using everyone else's measuring stick. You're using your own measuring stick. The last thing that you might need to be aware of, and I'm just going to throw this in there last minute, is goals. You may have, especially as your children get older, if they want to get into certain colleges, universities, or programs, then there's probably some very specific goals they're going to have to do. Well, now you know when it's enough. If you don't do this math and this chemistry and this physics and this biology, you're not going to get into that. So that's what's enough. And decide together that's what you're interested in, then go in that direction. And that's your stick, and that's what you're going to follow. So figure out what your stick is and figure out where it's coming from and make sure it's the right stick for your family. And yeah, then do you and walk the path that you're supposed to walk.